Mark here. We know Mark is an Australian working for an American company living in the UK. He's basically the poster child of what we're about to talk about. And Mark, what are the major trends and major workforce trends that are currently happening in the market?
It's a fascinating time. When the company was started 10 years ago, it was really about global expansion. So it was those technology companies, generally out of the US, who've got some private equity backing, want to go internationally. So it was helping to put sales, business development people on the ground in different locations. What we've certainly seen, certainly since the pandemic, is global remote workforce. You can't find the right people in a London or a New York or an Amsterdam, and companies are sort of opening the aperture a little bit more. Obviously, the Great Resignation has sort of accelerated that as well. I think the other thing that we're just starting to see now is companies are very aware of concentration risk, right? Is your supply chain or your people having them all in one location. So Ukraine with the war over there, certainly from a people perspective, China, Shanghai and lockdowns. So companies are now looking at how do we sort of disperse this? How do we have a distributed workforce that does play into everything that we're seeing with global remote workforce? So it's really changed the model. And I do think companies now, heads are above water after sort of the pandemic and lockdowns. Companies are being a bit more strategic, and they're thinking not tactically, what do I need to do now, because that was what happened in 2020, early 2021. It's a case of how do I plan for this? What do I need to put in place, support policies, those types of things.
Yeah, I mean, I was looking at your LinkedIn profile, and your description kind of says removing barriers to global business, to global business by making it easier for companies to hire game-changing talent anywhere in the world. And it's great. It's better than just purely VP of kind of talent recruitment. What are companies looking? Why are companies looking beyond their borders, and why are some holding back? Why aren't they doing it?
I think I worked in multinational companies for many years, and hiring people internationally was the domain of multinational companies who had offices and entities around the world, and they could tap into that global talent pool because they're a global company. I think nowadays people are looking at global talent. There's talent everywhere. My sort of controversial viewpoint is there's no global talent shortage. There are localized talent shortages. And if you look at knowledge workers, as long as you don't need somebody physically on site, so one of the ladies on the panelists yesterday was talking about, we pour concrete and we do rebar. People need to be physically there. Most of our customers are knowledge workers, right? They're in consulting type companies, tech companies. One of the barriers to it is understanding the options. It's very, very complex, right? So you've got HR, legal, tax, compliance. You can't build up that internal expertise within your company if you're only going to have 2 or 3 people in a particular location. So I think, first of all, it's understanding what the opportunities are. And employer of record as an industry is one of those options that sort of people didn't know about. We were spending 10 years educating people, and now people really understand the use case for it. I think the other thing, once you've decided that, okay, the opportunities are there and we want to expand our business, we want to sort of have a broader talent pool, you've got to understand the cost of doing that. So if you're looking for people within a particular region or a location, what are the cost differentials between different locations? Let's assume that all the numbers make sense and you want to go international. We work with a lot of sort of pre-IPO companies, often private equity investor companies. Mm-hmm. They may have a brand within their space, but they may, if you're an American company or a UK company, you don't have a brand in Singapore. You don't have a brand in APAC or LATAM. You also don't have an employer value proposition. So actually you need almost to partner with people who can represent you in those locations. And I think the final one is you might be a company that has a great recruitment or a talent acquisition team that are great domestically, but then you ask them to hire in Singapore or Hong Kong or Australia, it's a new world. And I think the speed of business at the moment, a lot of companies don't have enough time to learn, build the expertise, make the mistakes and those types of things. So I think they're the challenges holding back some companies. Also, there's a mindset challenge. This has accelerated the last couple of years. We're going back to tools and processes that we used pre-pandemic. They're not necessarily working fast enough for a lot of companies, a lot of industry sectors.
Yep. And I mean, I hear the term location agnostic quite a bit. And I know we speak about the digital nomad working from anywhere. So that's slightly different where you're employed somewhere and I now want to work anywhere. What we're talking here about is kind of, it's opening that net when you're looking for the right talent.
Yeah.
So you used to kind of, when you're looking at something, you're looking at I want the best person in my city. All of a sudden, with global recruitment, you can now open that net up everywhere. So, what's the actual strategies around it? How do you go about doing that at the best way?
Yeah, I mean, I think we say location agnostic is you're looking for the best person, right? You're looking for the best talent. So, certainly, given the global talent pool, if you're using sort of companies such as ourselves, what you can do is tell me the profile of the person that you want. What are the skills and experience? What is the network? What is the background that you need for that particular individual? If you can be open in terms of location, you can find the best person, knowing that you've got kind of the ability to quickly provide them with, a compliant employment contract and compliant benefits. And a lot of that can be done at speed as well. So I think what we've found is that a lot of times when we're talking to customers, they say, I want to have 5 people in this particular location. And we say, well, actually, if you can spread the net a little bit wider, keep in a time zone or a language, family or something like that. But if you can spread it a little bit, but the opportunities to find the right kind of talent is there. The other one is a great panel yesterday, and Russ Shaw was on there, the diversity. We work with Russ quite closely, is by hiring globally and by opening up the aperture, you get diversity. You don't even have to plan around it, because if you're hiring different countries, different cities, you're building that diversity. And I mean, diversity in global organizations is really where the power is, right? And I think the lady yesterday said, we don't need to talk about this anymore. It's been proven. So I think global hiring, yes, it's a point solution for a lot of companies at the moment, but by doing that, you're just bringing diversity into your business. You're reflecting your customer base and things like that. So lots of different ways of doing it, sort of tactics around it. But I think really it's a mindset change. If you say, we need somebody with this type of profile. We need somebody that will balance the other parts of the team. I've got team members in the Philippines, in Ireland, in Colombia, in my particular team. They all bring completely different things to the equation. And sometimes when we're trying to solve problems, I've got a guy in Colombia, he comes from quite an academic background. He says, why wouldn't we do it this way? I've never thought about this. I've been doing it for 25 years. And just having that diversity in there and giving people the voice, I think that's where global hiring really helps. So it's not just about, I've got a problem, can't find the right person here. By bringing that in, you get the person, but the sum is greater than the whole when you put it all together from a diversity perspective.
And do you find that the global recruitment are for companies that are global, or do you find that there are more and more companies that are based in one country, that's their operational, where they're operational, but they're still opening up their talent search?
I think there's two things. One is that there's forward-thinking companies that see this is the future of work. There's others that are being forced into it. So I was talking to it's an automotive supplier from Canada that supports Detroit, Ford, and all the companies there. They're getting massive turnover because there's a great resignation, there's high wage inflation. They're looking for mechanical engineers, and they go, we don't actually care where they are, but we want to have a stable workforce. We do want 5 or 10 people. We want them to be in the same location so they can get together. This is a company that 2 or 3 years ago would have never done that, right? They have people in factories. They now know that remote work works. They know that collaboration can work, and they've now got the right technology, the right tools, the right ways of working. That's an option to them. I think they're being forced that way, whereas a lot of our customers are going like, I want to get ahead of this. This is a competitive advantage for me doing that. So it's not just global companies, but it is globally minded companies. And I think the whole topic of this conference, I don't need to convince anyone of the power of thinking global. And we are seeing it on a daily basis, and it's changing. We used to see small and medium-sized companies, pre-IPO tech companies, those types of things. We're seeing enterprises, very large global enterprises that are in 60 countries that say 60 countries isn't enough. We want to be everywhere. We want to retain the people we already have. So if they want to move to another location, we've got sort of a plug-and-play solution to that. And to broaden it, so moving away from hubs. So it's not just the smaller companies, it's not just the global companies, it's really opening up. And I hope the trend continues because there's a lot of positive opportunities, and we talk about the democratization of opportunities. In the past, when I started my career, you had to move to a particular country to get certain types of opportunities, and you see that migration into the big urban centers, and we're sort of saying there's a solution to that, and actually there's social benefit around that as well. You're moving opportunities to the individuals, but you're also diversifying for companies, but you're building up the society, you're bringing new skills and opportunities in there. So I think in 5 or 10 years, we'll see the pandemic as having the positive effects on that.
Yeah. They say that you can't manage what you don't measure. Mm-hmm. So what are some of the global metrics, the talent metrics that you use? And are there some consistencies around the globe, or are there kind of local nuances that we need to be aware of?
It's really interesting because, for those of you in HR, you sort of talk about funnel metrics. So how many applicants do I need to get a certain number of candidates to get to a certain number of hires? Those of you that are more commercial business development, it's a sales pipeline. How many leads do I need to get to convert to a one customer? So a lot of the metrics are around that in talent acquisition. And the systems measure that. So, you've got big enterprise software, Workdays, those types of things that are measuring it. So it's time to fill, it's cost per hire, it's interview to offer ratio. They're all fantastic. I don't know that we need to change the metrics. Mm-hmm. The baselines have completely changed, right? So I look at it, it's a demand and supply equation. At the moment, the demand, the jobs, is more than the supply, the people that are able to do that. In certain locations, certain industries, it's obviously not broad brush. If you look at that from, the candidate pool, if you are having an office-based role, mm-hmm. Same chair, same person, same chair, different person, you want people to come into the office 5 days a week, the candidate pool has shrunk since pre-COVID, because a lot of people say, I want flexibility, I don't want to be in the office every day. So if you look at it, the baseline of that has changed. If you look at hybrid working, so I'm in the office 2 days a week and I work from home 3 days a week, the candidate pool is about the same size as it was pre-pandemic, because you're still having that commutable distance or time around an office. And then you look at remote, and if you can move the step to remote, then the candidate pool has expanded for you. And then you mentioned digital nomads. If you say digital nomads, I started my career in relocation, global mobility, moving people to work. And then I said, well, actually, now we're moving the work to the people when they're working remote. Digital nomads, the work and the people are moving, right? They're naturally moving themselves. So you've expanded the talent pool. So I don't think the metrics need to change. I don't know that they can, because a lot of companies have got sophisticated ERPs and those types of things. To change the metrics, we don't necessarily need. But I think you can't compare it to the past, and you need to look at different baselines. So if you previously needed 50 candidates or 50 applicants to apply to get one hire based on previous experience, those types of things, you probably need more than 50 now, but you're looking in different places for those people. And then when you factor in global workforce, you probably need more than 50 because you introduce language or the ability to work remotely into that. So I think that the metrics are great, and I'm a MBA, Six Sigma black belt, but I go, don't get stuck on that, because the world has changed. So let's just be flexible. Don't chase the number, because actually, time to fill is a really important metric in talent acquisition. Well, time to fill is 30 days. Well, I don't want to spend 30 days finding the wrong person. I want to spend 45 days spending the right person. So understanding the metrics. I think in a few years' time, things will have balanced out a little bit, but it's a bit of a challenge at the moment.
And do you feel, especially with, I think Zain spoke about flying over to China to go and meet someone for an interview. Where do you feel that there's a gap in even the interview process, and that real feel of the handshake, right? Mm-hmm. We're all getting back to finally shaking hands again. Yep. You miss that when it's fully remote. I mean, where do you think that's moving when it comes to the technology of how to hire?
I think, we were forced into remote working. Everybody was doing interviews on Zoom. I was hired entirely on Zoom. I've never met anybody within the company. We went from 350 people to 1,100 in the last 18 months, which means 700 people we've never met before. It's very strange when you meet them for the first time, because you've hired somebody. It's not sight unseen, but there's certain things about that person. I think we've become comfortable with that because there was no other option. It wasn't a choice. Nobody would choose to go to that model. Everybody's forced to do that. The technology is fantastic. I think now what we're seeing is people are missing that link. So we had a kind of all hands and a CEO came in a couple of weeks ago, and there's lots of people that are way taller than I expected. There's lots of people that really, the way that they present themselves on a camera in an hour is very different. And actually, but we've been pleasantly surprised because everybody was in that boat. You know, we had to do these types of things. The technology facilitates it. I think we've got comfortable with it. I think we need to balance it right now that we do have the opportunity to bring people together. So what we've started to do is, you might not be, hiring manager in that particular location, but you've got somebody from your company that can look at, which cultural fit is a bit of a misnomer, but how does that person fit with your company? And these are the types of things that I think tech enables a lot of that, but the ability to connect with people, particularly when you're recruiting them. This is a marriage, right? I mean, in a lot of countries, this is a long-term commitment on both sides, right? And actually, candidates are now saying, can I come to your office, or can we meet for a coffee? Can we do those things? Being quite proactive about it. In certain locations, we're not seeing that in Asia because we've got lots of countries that are still in lockdown, but certainly North America and Europe, it's getting back to the people side of things, which is great. We're a tech company, but it's all about the people, right?
Yeah. And I mean, we're seeing this bounce back from the pandemic. It's so amazing to be in the same room with everyone as we're going along. I'm hearing more and more companies calling everyone back to the office. Mm-hmm. Do you think this trend of the global outreach is a kind of a pandemic thing? Do you think we're going to bounce all the way back and people will eventually say, yeah, but I found all of these things. I want everyone back in the office?
It's really interesting. I was talking to the MD of a very large recruitment firm in Ireland yesterday, and he said companies have probably been too quick at putting the line in the sand. You need to be back in the office because everyone's adjusting to, I work 100% remote. I'm based in London, but we don't have an office here, so I'm 100% remote. I sometimes miss the office, but I haven't really had enough time to adjust what do I miss about the office. Mm-hmm. So I think the great thing is companies that are really black and white, a lot of them have gone out and said, everybody's back in the office. And then they see the pushback from their people, and then they adjust. It's like, well, one day a week at this. And then they're being specific. The great thing about lines in the sand is you can clean the sand and you can draw a new line. You have to be very comfortable saying to your people, we haven't worked this out. You haven't worked it out. You don't know exactly what you want to do, how much flexibility you want, what are the things you miss about being in an office. So I'm hoping that there'll be a happy medium. It will not be a happy medium as a society or as a workforce. It will be individuals to companies. And I think that's where the values and the cultural alignment between people and the companies are going to be there, because people that want 5 days a week, there are a lot of people, particularly in London, living in a 2-bedroom flat with some flatmates. I want to be in the office because I have no peace and quiet at home. Yep. If you live in the countryside, it's a totally different thing. So I'm hoping that there's so much momentum, and it's almost like the diversity thing. There's a proven business case. We did this work from home experiment, it worked. But there's elements of it that don't work. And anybody that, consulting companies are doing lots of things, 87% said that they would give up a benefit in order to have flexibility. It's a point of time. If you ask that same question 3 months later, it's changed. So obviously from a business perspective, long may it continue, but I think we're going to adjust to that, and there's opportunities, depending on companies, industry sectors, those types of things.
And then it becomes important to have the get-togethers, doesn't it? So we've got our Cape Town team. I'm based in Cape Town, and we brought some of the Cape Town team over. Again, the same thing. You're seeing the heights for the first time. You're meeting people for the first time. That becomes super important now. Mm-hmm. The all-hands meetings where you get to see these people. And I guess you've got the saving of the office space that you don't need to kind of pay for on a monthly basis. Put that into regular meetings and getting it together. Do you see that's happening more?
We do, and I think people look to us because of the industry that we're in. We're helping companies to do this, right? So we have to sort of drink our own Kool-Aid, and there's multiple different flavors of Kool-Aid, if you didn't know. So it's not like one size fits all, but we have guidelines around that. So how do you get people engaged? When we're going to have people together, it's not just about stuff you could have done on Zoom. It is collaboration. It's like getting... We had our CEO was in town, I think, last week. We change tables regularly because a lot of people I've never met before. They're different departments, different areas. So there's going to be more time spent around making the connection, the human connection, when you get people in place. It's not about tactically doing a workshop. You might do it for 2 or 3 hours, but you need to have 2 or 3 hours. And actually, our CEO said, you have to make it special. Make it worthwhile that somebody's traveling to that. Also, don't restrict it just because everybody's invited. It doesn't matter where they are in the world. Everybody should be invited. They don't have to come, right? But give them the choice for that. So we're certainly seeing a lot of companies doing that, being quite creative about it. And I think it's obviously with great resignation, retention is very, very important. And the companies that are really saying, let's work together, let's collaborate. What do you want to see? When we're coming together, what location do you want to go to? I just say, don't make it London. I'd like to get on a plane and go somewhere else rather than everyone come here. So it's interesting, but again, we're still in such an infancy stage. And it's not a global thing. I mean, I've got a friend in Shanghai who's saying, we're still locked down. They've unlocked the padlock, but they haven't taken the padlock off the building. So there's some countries and regions that are still sort of challenged that. As a global company, how do you manage that? How do you be sensitive around everyone's not in the same boat anymore?
Yep. I'm going to come out for some questions after this next one. Let's talk about mistakes. So what are the most common mistakes companies are making on this?
There are so many opportunities to make mistakes. I think the challenge that we have, most companies now, is the speed of execution, right? So we've got teams, it's building the plane and flying it. The companies, and there was a mobility panel, global mobility panel yesterday, and they have lots of challenges that suddenly came to their desk. They don't have the people power to actually solve those. So trying to do it alone, when it's complex, why would you want to spend 6 months becoming an expert in something that might not work? Try it, experiment on it. Does it work for remote workforce? Does that work for my company? The other things, if we're talking specifically about talent, is if you're hiring internationally, you want to find the best person. The best person is not applying for a job on LinkedIn or Indeed because you don't have a brand name, and there's lots of other opportunities out there. So the best talent are passive. They need to be proactively approached using recruitment partners, those types of things. You need to sort of invest the time in it. The other thing, the biggest challenge I find now is speed. Once you have found that person and you say, like, Siraj, you're absolutely our number one person, you cannot spend 2 weeks putting an employment contract together, because if somebody's in the employment market, you might have approached them first. They said, well, if I'm looking for a job, I might as well entertain some of the other opportunities there. So I think from our perspective, it's around, that's where technology comes in, is once you've identified that person, how quickly can you capture all their details, put it into an employment contract, give them the benefits, turn around, get it in their hands, and give them the opportunity to make a decision. The biggest mistake I see is companies using a period between a verbal offer, so we'd love to have you, and actually getting something in somebody's hands. They're using it as a pre-onboarding. It's like we're socializing you into, we're going to meet, introduce you to lots of people. And actually the person, until you put a contract in their hand, it's still the interview process for them. And then it's just not moving fast enough. So I think those companies, when you're looking at hiring globally, the first thing to do is, what are you going to do when you need to get to offer? How quickly can you do that? Do you have the right people? Do you know who the approvers need to be? Because we can turn a contract around in 24 hours, anywhere in the world. We can onboard it in a couple of days. If the competition takes 2 weeks and HR's off this week, or there's another priority, and this is where you need to put the power into the hands of hiring managers, give them the approval parameters and different things like that, and use technology to kind of help you. And that bridges time zones as well. You're not waiting until somebody comes online the next day in head office. Yep. Everything is kind of there.
Okay. Any questions?
Hi. Thank you very much, Mark. That was actually a really good presentation. I think a real life subject that we can all relate to. So the question I have is, Globalization Partners as a company has grown rapidly in the last 12 months, right? So internally within your organization, you're recruiting from all over the world. How do you as a business, and I guess it applies to all large companies, how do you maintain culture and that sense of loyalty with the rapid pace of growth? And if you're hiring talent, you want to retain that talent, and you're hiring it anywhere, right? So there are minimal teams in those countries. How do you maintain that sense of loyalty, connectivity to the overall vision of the organization?
It's incredibly easy and it's incredibly difficult, right? Because I think there's a secret sauce, and if anyone can codify it, there's billions in that. And what I found is I joined the company a year ago, and I think when I signed my employment agreement, we had maybe 350 people. As I say, we're 1,100 now. when we hire people, we talk about fit, and cultural fit, as I say, is a box, right? Everybody's got to fit in the same box so we all get along. But actually, the fit with us is a mindset, right? You've got to be global. You want to learn. You want to move fast. You're comfortable with ambiguity. Everybody that we have coming in, from the first call that they're on, it's contagious because they see how everyone else acts from the top all the way down. We're a very open company. We can do that because our growth, we were a 10-year-old company, but our growth's pretty stable, and then it shot. There's a lot of companies within sort of our space that have done the same thing. We have a very strong leadership. We're a founder, until a month ago, we're a founder-led company, and that really sort of permeates through the business, the language that we use. We don't have policies and procedures and guidelines around those things. I come from banking where everything had to be structured, everything had to be documented. This is the way you approach things. We're kind of frameworks, but it's more around demonstrating those things. And I don't actually know how we do it, but it's incredible. And somebody says, it's like a virus, it's contagious. Okay, we're in the pandemic. Probably don't use that metaphor, it's not very appropriate. But it is, and I think we're trying to look at almost culture as a service, right? So how did we make this work? And Nicole Sahina, who's our CEO, there's a book outside that she wrote. There's got some sort of thoughts around that, but it's really very strong culture from the beginning, and do everything you can to focus on it. We have a head of culture and engagement. It's not their responsibility, they just keep an eye on it. And they say, things are going in the wrong direction here. We call people out. If we see behavior, let's say I worked in an investment bank for a long time. Behavior in an investment bank meeting, when everybody walks out and there's no blood on the floor, is actually a pretty good meeting. And I walk in for Globalization Partners, and we're a little bit too huggy, touchy-feely, everything's positive. Yes, it actually works, and I think it is a secret sauce, and if anybody sort of cracked it, but I think it is company-specific as well. It's not going to work for everybody, and the good thing is we don't have a legacy. Our cultural legacy has not changed in the 10 years. It's still the same company, we're just a lot bigger.
Any other questions? And then we'll open up for one more after that.
Thanks, Mark. Employer of record is a fantastic solution for global expansion, but there's always a little bit of reticence when a candidate applies for a job at Microsoft in Egypt, for example, and suddenly they find an employment contract on their desk from Globalization Partners. What do Globalization Partners do to mitigate that risk and put the candidate at ease? Yeah,
it's a brilliant question, because there's a cultural element to this, because I think in Western Europe and in the US, people are becoming more familiar with that. They've got a friend that's through that. We talk about it very early in the recruitment process. So we either sort of provide materials or guidance to the company, or if we're using recruitment partners, we talk about how to position this. A lot of people are seeing it as positive. The most important thing is you can't differentiate between an internal employee and somebody who's engaged under us. There shouldn't be different benefits. There shouldn't be different ways of working. It's not a contractor versus an employee relationship. They're both employees. It's just they're engaged under a different entity. We explain it to people. We say, this is the reason. There's going to be 3 people that are going to be in Singapore. We're not going to build up an office. You can't work directly. There's lots of things that we do around that. The other thing is that we, as a company, have spent a lot of time and effort being that, having the credibility, having the trust in the market, right? So if you go on our website, it's in 15 different in languages. All of the content's in 15 languages. So they may not be, certainly Microsoft and others would be familiar, but a lot of the companies we work with, they don't know the brand, they don't trust the brand. They can trust our brand to some extent. It's quite fascinating because you go to Asia Pacific and certainly East Asia, it's much more of a challenge. We need to spend a lot more time making sure that they explain that this is not a diluted version of working for the company. You're 100% there. It's really it's a legal transaction sits behind it, and the company is doing that for very good reasons, because if the company couldn't do that, they couldn't give you the job. Right? So people go like, okay, that opportunity came to me because somebody like ourselves, and there are others in the room here, have provided that opportunity, that flexibility. So again, it's, I think, certain locations are a bit more comfortable. It's an education process for the company. And we lose some candidates when it comes to that. but we don't lose them if they knew about that in the beginning. You can't bring the contract and say, I thought I was working for Microsoft, it says Globalization Partners on there. It's got to be very early in the process, and we see that works pretty well. It's a great question because it's an industry challenge, I think, and in 10 years' time, no one will have to, everybody will understand it might not be called employer of record, it might be something different, right? But you know, we're in that sort of period of transition as we are with remote work as well.
Good. Another question, one last one. I know we're standing between you and your lunch, so I don't see any more hands. Mark, thank you very much. That was great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Thank you. Okay.